years ago, I happened to read a book that would change the way I thought about many things. And it wasn't the Bible. I had known the Bible for quite a while. No, this book was by Ann Wilson Schaaf, and it was called When Society Becomes an Addict. The author explores what she calls the addictive system functions in our society to keep us off balance and unwell. And one of the processes of the addictive system, as she explained it, was dualism. And in her words, dualism keeps us confused and indecisive, believing that we must choose between two undesirable options, the rock and the hard place, or the frying pan and the fire. Dualistic thinking also operates on a societal level. One must either be a Democrat or a Republican, or a Christian or a non-Christian, or a believer or an unbeliever, politically correct or politically incorrect. She continues, I have a friend who is a Roman Catholic nun. At one point she decided to live in our household. I experienced some concern about the kind of support that I could give her since she was raised a Protestant. My dear, she said jokingly, there are no such things as Protestants. There are Catholics and non-Catholics. Dualism can be self-centered. It also can mean that there are two poles to one issue. A person is a winner or a loser, or beautiful or ugly, a success or a failure. Even if we're somewhere on the spectrum, the poles are still decided. Which is why this gospel text is certainly one of the most famous, even among people who don't know the Bible. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, Jesus says, turn the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Right and left cheeks, your clothing, your coat and your cloak, and journey 1 mile or more. Any way we look at it, it seems as if Jesus wants us to be the gift that keeps on giving. Or another way to look at it is, he seems to want us to passively accept whatever a domineering person or a bully wants to do to us. And for many of us, our sense of justice tends to rise up so that we want to say, does following Jesus have to mean being a loser, a failure, or not standing up for myself? My Jewish annotated New Testament makes some interesting points about this gospel text. To have the right cheek slapped meant a backhanded slap. People in Jesus' day used their right hand to eat, to gesture, to do most things. The left hand, in a time of primitive hygiene, was usually unclean. Bishop Catherine Wainick quotes Walter Wink when she makes a similar point and adds, to hit you on the right cheek with the right hand, they must backhand you. And that is the way you hit someone you consider to be your inferior. It's the way a Roman might hit a Jew. It's intended to humiliate. Jesus says, if someone treats you this way, don't get violent, but offer the left cheek to be struck. Again, there is a cultural meaning that has been lost to us. To hit someone on the left cheek, and using the right hand, this would be an open slap or a punch, is the way you hit an equal. And if you hit an equal, you're subject to a fine. Not quite the interpretation many of us have known over the years. My Bible also notes that most people own only 2 garments. So to be told by a judge to give your coat and then to give your cloak as well would leave you chilly, exposed, and in the manner of St. Francis renouncing the world, naked. And that would uncover the injustice of the argument. It sounds pretty radical. And regarding the journey, Roman soldiers could force Jewish people to carry their gear for 1 mile. So carrying that gear for an additional mile would make a statement of nonviolent resistance. So are you surprised that Jesus' words could have these undercurrents of meaning? The way I see it, Jesus is stepping outside the dualism. There are 2 options regarding the cheek slapping that we can imagine: fighting back and getting yourself either punished or killed, or not fighting back and feeling a sense of violation. And then Jesus suggests a 3rd option: letting natural consequences stop the abuse. The 2 options regarding the coat are giving the coat up, even though the judge has perhaps unjustly ordered it to be handed over, fighting to keep it and being punished, or giving above and beyond and making a stark statement of the injustice. And going the 2nd mile starts to have connotations of the nonviolent resistance of a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King. When we can see only 2 ways to behave in a difficult situation, and they both feel bad, there's often a 3rd way. Jesus helps us to step out of the dualism, out of the tug of war. As James Allison says in his wonderful new book, Jesus the Forgiving Victim, Listening for the Unheard Voice. I'm reading it right now. Jesus knows how susceptible we are to taking our enemies on board and becoming just like them by acting out reciprocally towards them. So he offers us this recipe for freedom: do not allow yourselves to be run by those who do you evil. This involves a refusal of negative reciprocity and a learning to move from the heart towards them in a way which has nothing to do with what they have done to you. Too much salt this morning. Finding the 3rd way is a way to step out of the dualism. And that is what Jesus does through his whole life, starting with his temptation in the wilderness, when he's encouraged to fight or submit to Satan. Instead, he comes up with another way to see things. One doesn't live by bread alone, or do not put the Lord your God to the test, or worship the Lord your God and serve only him. 3 options: win, lose, and don't engage, or turn the tables. Yesterday, on the Episcopal news service, I read an open letter from the Bishop of Atlanta, Robert Wright, who was responding to some who were critical of his decision to recommend the book The Daniel Plan for reading during Lent. That book is co-authored by Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church, who's been unsupportive of gay and lesbian people. Bishop Wright was criticized by some who asked him, "What were you thinking in recommending this book?" He says, "By recommending the Daniel Plan, I am in no way endorsing Pastor Warren's views on human sexuality. Having read the book, there's nothing in its content that is inconsistent with our baptismal promises. I therefore am certain his invitation to thoughtfulness about health and spiritual wholeness has merit, is commendable, and is useful." Not long ago, other members of the Diocese of Atlanta were asking me what was I thinking when I made provision for the blessing of monogamous, lifelong same-sex relationships. No doubt more people will ask that question when I produce a video encouraging teens struggling with questions of sexuality not to consider suicide, because God loves them and they are welcome in the Episcopal Church. He continues, "I confess to you, I struggle with thin, single-issue-based fellowship that gets passed off as Christian fellowship on both sides of the issue. I deeply believe that human beings are too complex and valuable to write off, even when their understandings are deemed deplorable. I'm afraid that I have preached and taught about a God of limitless grace, love, and mercy too long to banish people to a garbage pile of contempt, or to teach polite indifference as an acceptable substitute for Christian fellowship. For decades in the Episcopal Church, we have debated and dialogued about the full inclusion of people, and I am proud of the gains we have made. But full inclusion must mean full inclusion even of those we vehemently disagree with, even those who cannot at present celebrate our humanity or dignity, or it is a hollow sentiment. When we say in our churches on Sunday morning, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here, do we really mean wherever you are, or something much smaller? Powerful words. If we allow Christ to help us disengage from the dualism, if we make it a practice to always look for the third way, we may find that we are witnesses for peace in a way we had never imagined. The historic peace churches, the Mennonites, the Amish, the Quakers, and the Church of the Brethren, might teach us something here. A Mennonite hymn, I bind my heart this tide, speaks of being enthralled to or totally serving something or someone. I share it now in conclusion. I bind my heart this tide to the Galilean side, to the wounds of Calvary, to the Christ who died for me. I bind my soul this day to the neighbor far away, and the stranger near at hand, in this town and in this land. I bind my heart in thrall to the God, the Lord of all, to the God, the poor one's friend, and the Christ whom he did send. I bind myself to peace, to make strife and envy cease. God, knit thou sure the cord of my thraldom to my Lord.